Welcome to my channel, Whodunit channel.
The rain had been falling over Lochdu for 3 days, which Hamish Macbeth considered an excellent reason for doing absolutely nothing. He sat beside the little stove in the police station, his long legs stretched toward the warmth, a chipped mug of coffee balanced on one knee. Towser lay asleep beneath the desk, snoring softly whenever the wind rattled the windows. The telephone rang. Hamish looked at it. It rang again. He looked at Towser. Towser opened one eye, saw the telephone, and closed it again. "Quite right," said Hamish. The telephone rang a third time. Hamish sighed. There were few things in life he disliked more than answering the telephone. Telephone calls invariably meant somebody wanted something. Usually they wanted him to work. Eventually he picked up the receiver. Police station. A clipped female voice answered. "Constable Macbeth, this is Sergeant McRae at Strathbane. There's been a complaint from the Lochdu Hotel." Hamish glanced toward the window. What sort of complaint? A guest. Hamish waited. A guest? Yes, Macbeth. A guest. Is he lost? No. Drunk? No. Then I don't see the problem. The sergeant made an irritated noise. The man is demanding police assistance. He says someone has been tampering with his room. Hamish brightened slightly. Anything stolen? Apparently not. Then he can come to the station and complain. He specifically asked for you. Hamish's face fell. That's unfortunate. Get yourself down there. The line went dead. Hamish replaced the receiver and stared gloomily at the rain. Towser lifted his head. "No," said Hamish. The dog sighed and went back to sleep. The Lochdu Hotel stood at the edge of the village, facing the loch and the dark mountains beyond it. In summer, tourists arrived in hired cars, took photographs of the mist and sheep, complained about the weather, and departed with stories about how wonderfully wild the highlands were. In winter, the hotel was mostly empty, which was why Hamish was suspicious of anyone who deliberately came to stay there. He pulled on his old police coat and stepped outside. The rain immediately soaked his hair. "Typical," he muttered. 10 minutes later, he entered the hotel smelling of wet wool. The lobby was warmer than the police station and considerably better furnished. Behind the reception desk stood Mrs. Mackellar, the hotel manager, a stout woman with silver hair and the expression of someone who had spent 30 years listening to English people complain about Scotland. She pointed toward the lounge. "He's in there. What's his name?" "Mr. Adrian Weatherby." Hamish stopped. "Weatherby? Aye. English? Very." Hamish nodded solemnly. "That explains it." Mrs. Mackellar gave him a sharp look. "He's rich. That explains it even more." Mr. Adrian Weatherby was standing beside the fireplace. He was perhaps 55, tall and narrow, with silver hair, a camel-colored jacket, and polished shoes that looked absurdly clean considering the weather outside. He turned as Hamish entered. "You're the policeman?" "Aye. You're rather late." Hamish looked at his watch. 3 minutes? I've been waiting for 20. "Aye. That's the difference between us." Weatherby frowned. Hamish smiled pleasantly. The Englishman did not smile back. "I have reason to believe someone entered my room last night." "Did they steal anything?" "No." "Break anything?" "No." "Leave anything?" Weatherby hesitated. Hamish noticed. "What did they leave?" "Nothing." "Then how do you know they were there?" Weatherby lowered his voice. "Because my toothbrush was moved." Hamish stared at him. "Mrs. Mackellar coughed behind the desk. "Your toothbrush?" "Yes." "Where was it?" "On the left side of the basin." "And where was it afterward?" "On the right." Hamish considered this grave development. Could have been the wind. Weatherby's face reddened. The window was closed. Very determined wind. "I want you to take this seriously." Hamish glanced at Mrs. Mackellar. "Did anyone see you?" "No." "Anyone hear anything?" "No." "Any footprints?" "No." "Broken lock?" "No." "Missing property?" "No." Hamish nodded. "Then I think you've had a very successful night." Weatherby stared at him. "You're useless. That's what people say." Hamish wandered toward the fireplace. He wasn't interested in the toothbrush. He was interested in Weatherby. The man had arrived in Lochdu 2 days earlier. According to Mrs. Mackellar, he had asked a great many questions about the land surrounding the hotel. Who owned the hills? Who owned the woodland? Who had fishing rights? Who was planning to sell? And, most interestingly, whether the old Highland Hotel had ever been offered for sale. Hamish looked at him again. "Why are you here, Mr. Weatherby?" "For business." "What business?" "Property. Buying the hotel." Weatherby smiled thinly. "Perhaps." Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains. For the first time, Hamish noticed something else. A pair of muddy boots stood beside the fireplace. They were much too large to belong to Weatherby. Hamish said nothing. He simply wandered over and examined them. Those yours? No. Mrs. Mackellar? No. Interesting. They belong to another guest. What guest? Mr. Douglas Kane. Hamish straightened. Where is he? Mrs. Mackellar answered quietly. He went out this morning. When? About 7. Where? She hesitated. He said he was going walking. Hamish looked through the rain-streaked window. The hills were disappearing beneath a curtain of mist. Today, Hamish scratched his chin. That's a foolish thing to do. Weatherby gave a short laugh. Perhaps your local people aren't as clever as you imagine. Hamish turned toward him. His expression remained lazy. His eyes did not. No, he said softly. Sometimes they're cleverer. Then, from somewhere beyond the hotel, came the distant sound of a dog barking. Once, twice, then silence. Hamish's shoulders stiffened. Towser, who had followed him into the hotel, suddenly stood alert. The old dog's ears pointed toward the door. Hamish looked at Mrs. Mackellar. Where's the path to the North Ridge? She pointed. Hamish reached for his coat. Weatherby frowned. What are you doing? Hamish sighed. I suppose I'm going to earn my wages. He stepped outside into the rain. Behind him, Adrian Weatherby remained beside the fire, watching through the window. And for the first time since arriving in Lockdow, the Englishman's expression showed something other than irritation. It showed fear. Chapter 2. The body on the ridge. The path to the North Ridge was miserable even in good weather. In rain, it became a test of character, and Hamish had never been particularly interested in character-building exercises. He trudged uphill with Towser behind him, his boots sinking into the wet peat. The wind came hard across the loch, dragging mist between the rocks. Hamish stopped twice, once to light a cigarette. The second time was because Towser had stopped. What is it? Towser sniffed the air. Hamish listened. Nothing. Then came a faint metallic clatter from somewhere ahead. He moved on. After another 100 yards, the path narrowed between two rocky outcrops. Beyond them stood a low stone wall, half collapsed and covered with moss. Towser ran toward it. Hamish followed more slowly. He knew what he would find. The dog had found a man. Douglas Kane lay on his back beside the stones. His walking jacket was soaked through. One arm was stretched above his head, and his other hand was curled tightly around a small brass key. His face was turned toward the sky, eyes open to the rain. Hamish crouched beside him. Kane? There was no answer. He touched the man's wrist. Cold, very cold. Hamish sat back on his heels. Well, that's ruined his day. Towser gave a low whine. Aye, Hamish said. And mine. He examined the body without touching it again. There was blood at the back of Kane's head. A narrow cut marked the man's temple. His coat was muddy, but his boots were strangely clean. Hamish frowned. The path was soaked. Anyone walking through the mud should have carried half the hillside on his boots. Kane's boots looked as if he'd put them on after reaching this place. Hamish stood. He looked toward the hotel. It was barely visible through the mist. He looked at the key in Kane's hand. Brass. Old-fashioned. Not a hotel key. Hamish knew because the Lockdow Hotel used modern numbered keys with little plastic tags. He took out his notebook. Then he put it away. There was no point writing anything down yet. His memory worked perfectly well when nobody expected it to. Towser sniffed the dead man's coat. Don't. The dog looked offended. Hamish studied the ground. There were footprints, chains, presumably. Another set ran along the wall. Small. Narrow. The left heel was deeply worn. Hamish followed the tracks with his eyes. They led toward the ridge. Then they vanished. Not because the rain had washed them away. Because whoever made them had stepped onto the stones. Hamish smiled faintly. That was clever. Towser wagged his tail. No, I don't mean clever enough. A sound came from behind them. Hamish turned. Adrian Weatherby stood on the path. He was breathing heavily and carrying an expensive walking stick. You found him, he said. Hamish watched him carefully. How did you know where we were? Weatherby looked toward the body. I followed you. Why? I thought you might need assistance. Hamish glanced at the walking stick. You've got an interesting idea of assistance. Weatherby ignored the remark. Is he dead? Aye. Good God. Weatherby took one step closer. Hamish raised a hand. Stay there. The Englishman stopped. Neither man spoke. Rain hissed against the stones. Then Weatherby said, It was an accident. Hamish looked at him. I didn't say it wasn't. Weatherby's face tightened. I meant Kane. I know. What happened to him? That's what I'm trying to discover. Weatherby looked down at the body. I warned him. About what? He shouldn't have gone walking. Hamish glanced at Kane's boots. Did he listen? No. People rarely do. Weatherby's eyes shifted toward the brass key. What is that? You tell me. I've never seen it. Hamish slipped the key into his pocket. Weatherby noticed. You shouldn't remove evidence. Hamish looked surprised. I thought you didn't know what it was. I don't. Then why are you worried? Weatherby said nothing. Hamish's suspicion grew. Before he could ask another question, the sound of an engine rose from the valley. A police Land Rover appeared through the mist. Strathbane had sent reinforcements. Hamish groaned. Blair. Weatherby looked confused. Who is Blair? The man who will tell me how badly I've handled this. The Land Rover skidded to a halt. Detective Chief Inspector Blair climbed out, followed by 2 uniformed officers. Blair was a large man with a red face and a temper that seemed permanently warmed by whiskey. Macbeth. Hamish waved. Morning. Where's the body? Over there. Blair strode toward it. He took one look at Kane and immediately turned toward Weatherby. You must be Mr. Weatherby. Yes. Did you see anything? Weatherby shook his head. Thought not. Hamish raised an eyebrow. Blair pointed at him. And you stay out of this. I found him. I know. Then perhaps I should? No. Blair crouched beside the body. After a moment he stood. Look straight forward. Hamish looked at Kane's boots. No. Blair glared. What did you say? I said the weather's dreadful. You said no. Hamish smiled innocently. I must have been thinking it. Blair turned away. Hamish watched him begin issuing orders. Search the ridge. Question the hotel guests. Check Kane's room. And, before anyone had examined the evidence properly, Blair announced his theory. Robbery gone wrong. Hamish said nothing quietly. Weatherby looked relieved. That was the interesting part. Hamish turned his gaze toward the hotel, where a single figure stood behind an upstairs window. Mrs. Mackellar. She was watching the ridge, but she wasn't looking at the body. She was looking directly at Hamish, and when their eyes met, she slowly raised one finger to her lips. Hamish frowned. Then she disappeared from the window. Hamish glanced down at the brass key hidden in his pocket. Something told him the key belonged to a door at the hotel. Something else told him that somebody had killed Douglas Kane to keep that door closed. He sighed. His quiet afternoon was officially over. Chapter 3. The guest in room 7. By noon, the rain had settled into the sort of steady drizzle that made Scotland look as if it had been forgotten under a wet blanket. Hamish returned to the Whodunit Hotel with Blair and the others trailing behind him. His boots were muddy, his hair was dripping, and his stomach was complaining loudly enough to be heard by Towser. Mrs. Mackellar met them in the lobby. Tea? Hamish looked at her gratefully. Aye. And something to eat, Blair snapped. Later. Hamish sighed. There is always a later with you, Blair. There'll be plenty of later if you stop wasting time. Hamish smiled and followed the detective chief inspector upstairs. Douglas Kane's room was number 7. Blair unlocked it and pushed the door open. The room was neat, too neat. A suitcase lay open on the bed. Shirts had been folded into precise piles. A leather toiletry bag stood beside the wash basin. On the desk were several brochures concerning Highland properties. Hamish wandered toward the window. Blair began searching the drawers. What are you looking for? Hamish asked. Evidence. Ah. Hamish looked out. The hotel stood above the loch, with the mountains rising behind it. From this window, the northern ridge was visible through gaps in the mist. He noticed something on the sill. A tiny smear of red mud. Hamish touched it with one finger. Blair looked over. What is it? Dirt. I can see that. Then we're making progress. Blair scowled. One of the officers opened the wardrobe. Kane's walking clothes were hanging inside. His boots were gone. Hamish glanced down. So he left wearing them. Obviously, Blair said. Except they weren't muddy. Blair stared at him. What? His boots. The ones on the body. Aye. They could have been cleaned. Hamish shook his head. Not in that rain. Blair waved him away. You're seeing mysteries everywhere. Hamish said nothing. He had learned long ago that arguing with Blair only encouraged the man. Instead, he examined the desk. Among the property brochures was a folded sheet of paper. He opened it, a list of names. Some were crossed out. Others had figures written beside them. Blair snatched it away. Leave that. What's it about? Property. That's what I thought. Blair tucked it into an evidence bag. Hamish wandered toward the bathroom. There, Beside the basin sat a toothbrush. He remembered Weatherby's complaint. The toothbrush had supposedly been moved. Hamish looked at it carefully. There was nothing remarkable about it. Then he noticed the glass beside it. A faint white ring marked the basin. Someone had recently moved the glass. Hamish opened the bathroom cabinet. Inside were shaving cream, soap, aspirin, and a small bottle of sleeping tablets. He frowned. Kane had not been taking them. The bottle was sealed. Hamish returned to the bedroom. Did Kane have any enemies? Blair snorted. Everyone has enemies. What about Weatherby? Weatherby says he barely knew him. Do you believe him? Blair looked irritated. Why shouldn't I? Hamish shrugged. Because rich men don't usually come to remote Highland hotels to admire the wallpaper. Blair stared at him. Macbeth? If you have something useful to say, say it. Hamish considered this. I haven't. Then stop talking. Hamish smiled. That suited him perfectly. Downstairs, Mrs. McKellar poured tea. Hamish ate 2 scones before asking his first question. Tell me about Kane. She looked nervous. He was quiet. Quiet people are often troublesome. He kept to himself. Except, Mrs. McKellar hesitated. Except he argued with Mr. Weatherby yesterday. About what? I don't know. You heard them? Aye. Where? In the corridor. What did Kane say? She looked toward the dining room, then lowered her voice. He said, you promised me. Hamish stopped eating. And Weatherby? He said, not here. Anything else? Mrs. McKellar shook her head. Hamish took another bite. What about the key? Her face changed. What key? The brass one found in Kane's hand. Mrs. McKellar went pale. Hamish noticed. You know it. No. You've seen it. I said no. You're a poor liar. She leaned closer. Constable. Leave this alone. Why? Because some doors are better left locked. Hamish smiled faintly. That's exactly what I was afraid you'd say. A bell rang at reception. They both turned. Adrian Weatherby stood in the doorway. He looked immaculate. Not a trace of mud remained on his shoes. Mrs. McKellar, he said, I need to speak with you. She nodded. Hamish watched them disappear into the office. Towser, lying beneath a nearby table, growled softly. Hamish looked at the dog. You don't like him either? Towser's growl deepened. Good. A minute later, Hamish heard voices behind the office door. Weatherby's voice was low and angry. Mrs. McKellar said something Hamish could not hear. Then came a sharp crash. Hamish stood. He crossed the lobby and opened the door. A chair had fallen over. Mrs. McKellar was standing against the wall. Weatherby was holding a small envelope. When he saw Hamish, he slipped it into his pocket. Private matter, he said. Hamish looked at Mrs. McKellar. She avoided his eyes. Everything all right? Perfectly, Weatherby replied. Hamish nodded. Aye. He turned away. At the staircase, he stopped. Mr. Weatherby? Yes? Your boots. Weatherby glanced down. What about them? They're clean. So, Hamish smiled. Nothing. He continued upstairs. Behind him, Weatherby watched until he disappeared. Then his expression changed. The pleasant confidence vanished. For the first time, he looked genuinely frightened. In room 7, Hamish stood alone beside the window. He opened his notebook and wrote 3 words. Kane, Weatherby, key. Then he added a 4th, door. He remembered Mrs. McKellar's warning. Some doors were better left locked. Hamish looked toward the corridor. There were 7 rooms on this floor. 6 were occupied. 1 was locked. Room 8. According to Mrs. McKellar, it had been empty for months. Hamish smiled. That was the sort of thing that usually meant it wasn't empty at all. Hamish disliked mysterious locked doors. Chapter 4. The Locked Room. Hamish waited until the hotel had gone quiet. Hamish did not enjoy listening to men complain about fishing. He enjoyed fishing. There was a difference. He stood outside room 8 with a candle in one hand and his police notebook in the other. The corridor smelled of coal smoke, damp wool, and furniture polish. The door was locked. Hamish tried the handle. Nothing. He looked up and down the corridor. Empty. He produced a ring of keys from his pocket. There were several. None fitted. That figures, he murmured. Towser sat behind him. You could be useful. Towser wagged his tail. Not that useful. Hamish knelt and examined the lock. It was old, brass, and scratched around the keyhole. Someone had recently tried to force it. He touched the wood beside the handle. Fresh splinters. Hamish straightened. The room had been entered recently, perhaps more than once. He walked downstairs and found Mrs. McKellar in the kitchen making tea. She looked up. You're not going to ask me about room 8, are you? No, she relaxed. Good. I'm going to ask you why you lied about it being empty. Her expression hardened. I didn't lie. You said nobody had used it for months. That is true. Then why was someone trying to open it tonight? Mrs. McKellar went still. Hamish poured himself tea. Milk. She stared at him. Milk? Aye. She handed him the jug. Hamish added milk and drank. Now, he said. Who has a key? She looked toward the kitchen door. Mr. Weatherby. Hamish nearly smiled. Why? He asked for it yesterday. Why? He said he wanted to inspect the building. Did you give it to him? No. Then how did he get one? I don't know. Hamish believed her. Mostly. Who else has a key? The owner. Anyone else? She hesitated. My husband used to have one. Used to? He died 6 years ago. Hamish nodded. That was not immediately useful. Then Mrs. McKellar added. But Mr. Weatherby bought something from his estate. What? I don't know. Hamish looked toward the ceiling. Room 8 waited upstairs. He finished his tea. I'm going back up. Constable. I? Don't. Hamish smiled. That's becoming a popular word tonight. He returned upstairs. This time he did not try the door. Instead, he examined the corridor. There was a narrow service passage behind the bedrooms, used by hotel staff. He found its entrance behind a linen cupboard. The passage was dark and dusty. Towser sneezed. Bless you. They moved quietly. Room 8 had a second door. Hamish tried it. It opened. The room was cold. The curtains were drawn. There was no furniture except a small table and an old wardrobe. Hamish stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of tobacco. Someone had been here. On the table lay a hotel register. Hamish opened it. The last entry was dated 6 months earlier. A name had been written in faded ink. Douglas Kane. Hamish stared at it. Kane had stayed in room 8. Hamish turned the page. Several names appeared beneath Kane's. Most were old. One was recent. Adrian Weatherby. Hamish felt a small chill that had nothing to do with the room. Weatherby had not checked into room 8, yet someone had written his name there. He heard footsteps. Hamish closed the register. A shadow passed beneath the door. He stepped behind the wardrobe. The handle moved. The door opened. Adrian Weatherby entered. He carried a small torch. He crossed directly to the table. Hamish watched him open the drawer. Weatherby removed an envelope. Then he turned. Hamish stepped out. Looking for something? Weatherby froze. For several seconds neither man moved. Then Weatherby laughed. You startled me. So I did. What are you doing in here? Same as you. I have every right to be here. Do you? Weatherby's smile disappeared. Hamish pointed at the envelope. What's inside? Nothing that concerns you. That usually means it concerns me. Weatherby slipped the envelope into his coat. Hamish moved closer. You knew Kane. I told you. You argued with him. We disagreed. You followed him to the ridge. No. You knew he was dead before you arrived. Weatherby's face tightened. I saw you leave the hotel. You followed me. I was worried. No. You were checking whether Kane had spoken. Weatherby stared at him. Hamish's voice remained mild. What did he have? I don't know what you're talking about. The key. Weatherby's eyes flicked toward Hamish's pocket. There. Just for an instant. But Hamish saw it. Fear. Real fear. Before either could speak, footsteps sounded in the corridor. Blair's voice called from outside. Macbeth! Weatherby stepped backward. Hamish blocked the door. Stay where you are. Blair entered. He looked from Hamish to Weatherby, then at the room. What the devil are you doing? Investigating. I told you to stay out of this. Hamish sighed. I'm beginning to think you enjoy saying that. Blair saw the register. What is that? Hamish handed it over. Blair read the entries. His expression changed. Why is Kane's name here? That's what I'd like to know. Blair looked at Weatherby. Were you in this room? Weatherby said nothing. Blair's face reddened. Answer me. I came looking for something. What? Weatherby glanced at Hamish. Then he smiled. Something belonging to Douglas Kane. Blair stepped forward. What? Weatherby slowly removed the envelope from his coat. Inside was a photograph. Blair took it. Hamish leaned over his shoulder. The photograph showed the hotel, taken from the opposite hillside. 3 figures stood outside the building. Kane, Weatherby, and Mrs. McKellar. On the back, someone had written a single sentence. You all know what happened in room 8. Hamish looked at Weatherby, then at Blair. Finally he looked toward the dark window. Outside, the rain had stopped, but far across the loch, a light had appeared on the mountain. Someone was watching the hotel. and Hamish had the uncomfortable feeling that whoever it was had been waiting for him. Chapter 5. The Woman Who Knew Too Much. The light on the mountain vanished. Hamish stared through the window for several seconds. "Did you see that?" he asked. Blair was still examining the photograph. "See what?" "A light. There are lights everywhere. Not on that mountain." Blair looked impatiently toward the glass. "Probably a shepherd. In November? People live out there. Not on that particular hill." Blair shoved the photograph into an evidence envelope. "Enough, Macbeth." Hamish shrugged. He had learned that the quickest way to keep Blair from discovering something was to let Blair believe he had discovered everything himself. Weatherby stood silently beside the table. Hamish watched him. The Englishman looked older than he had that morning. His shoulders were stiff, and there were dark circles beneath his eyes. "Who took the photograph?" Hamish asked. "I don't know." "Kane?" "I don't know." "Mrs. Mackellar?" "I don't know." "You're very certain about your ignorance." Weatherby glared at him. Blair interrupted. "Weatherby, you're coming downstairs." "Why?" "I want a statement. I've already given one. You'll give another." Weatherby walked toward the door. Hamish moved aside. As the man passed, Hamish noticed mud on the heel of his left shoe. Only the left. The same peculiar wear he had noticed in the footprints on the ridge. He said nothing. Blair followed Weatherby downstairs. Hamish remained in room 8. Towser sniffed the floor. "Find anything?" The dog went directly to the wardrobe. Hamish opened it. Nothing. Towser scratched at the bottom. Hamish knelt and lifted a loose floorboard. Beneath it lay a small brown leather purse. Inside was a silver locket, 3 old photographs, and a receipt from a solicitor in Inverness. The receipt was dated 18 years earlier. Hamish read the name. Margaret Mackellar. He frowned. Mrs. Mackellar had told him her husband died 6 years ago. Why had she paid a solicitor 18 years earlier? The answer might have been ordinary. In Lochdu, ordinary things were often the most dangerous. Hamish pocketed the receipt and replaced the purse. Then he heard footsteps. Mrs. Mackellar appeared in the doorway. She looked at him. He looked at her. Neither spoke. "You found it," she said. Hamish nodded. "What is it?" "You know." "I know what?" "The purse." She closed her eyes briefly. "Mr. Macbeth, please. Did Kane know about this?" "Yes." "Did Weatherby?" "Yes." "Did your husband?" "No." Hamish studied her. That answer came too quickly. "Tell me about room 8. Mrs. Mackellar stepped inside and shut the door. 18 years ago, my husband and I had financial trouble. We were going to lose the hotel. Who helped? No one. Then how did you keep it?" She looked toward the window. "A man offered to buy the debt." "Kane?" "No. His father." Hamish's eyebrows rose. "Douglas Kane's father. A wealthy developer. He wanted this land. Why?" "There was supposed to be a road through the valley." Hamish understood. "The hotel would have become valuable." "Yes." "And your husband refused to sell." "He did." "Why?" "Because the road would have destroyed the village." Hamish leaned against the table. "What happened next?" "Mr. Kane's father withdrew the offer. A year later he died. And Douglas, he came looking for the old agreement." "What agreement?" "The one in the purse." Hamish looked at the wardrobe. "What did it prove?" "That my husband had been promised ownership of land beyond the hotel. And the promise was never honored." "Why would Douglas care?" "Because his father had forged the agreement." Hamish stared at her. "Forged?" Mrs. Mackellar nodded. "Douglas discovered it recently. He threatened to expose his father's fraud. And Weatherby, he was working for the family. Then why was Weatherby afraid?" Mrs. Mackellar looked directly at Hamish. "Because Douglas wasn't the only person who knew." A floorboard creaked in the corridor. Hamish opened the door. Nobody was there. He looked down. A wet footprint marked the polished floor. Left heel worn deeply. Hamish followed it. The footprint ended at the stairs. He looked over the railing. Adrian Weatherby stood below. He was staring upward. Their eyes met. Weatherby turned and walked quickly away. Hamish went downstairs. Blair was in the lounge, dictating notes to an officer. "Where's Weatherby?" "Gone." "Gone where?" "He said he was going for a walk." Hamish laughed. Blair looked annoyed. "What?" "Nothing. You've got that expression again." "What expression?" "The one that says you're about to make trouble." Hamish sat beside the fire. "I've been thinking. That is usually dangerous." Hamish ignored him. "Blair, how long would it take to walk from here to the North Ridge?" 20 minutes. 30 in this weather. "Perhaps." "And how long would it take to walk from the ridge back here?" "Same." Hamish nodded. "Then Weatherby couldn't have followed me to the ridge, watched me find Kane, returned to the hotel, changed his boots, and still arrived 3 minutes after me." Blair stared at him. What are you suggesting? That he was already there? Blair's face hardened. You're accusing Weatherby. I'm suggesting he lied. That's not the same thing. No. Hamish looked toward the window. But it can become the same thing. The telephone rang. Everyone jumped. The officer answered. Then he looked at Blair. Sir, there's been an incident outside. What sort? A car has gone off the road. Hamish stood. Whose car? The officer swallowed. Mr. Weatherby's. Hamish grabbed his coat. Outside, the wind had returned. And somewhere beyond the hotel, hidden among the dark hills, somebody was laughing. Hamish paused. Was anyone in the car? No. Then where is Weatherby? The officer shook his head. We don't know. Hamish looked back at the hotel. Mrs. Mackellar stood at the desk. Their eyes met. She seemed about to speak. Then she turned away. Hamish knew that look. It was the look of someone who had realized that a secret had stopped being buried. He stepped into the rain. Come on, Towser. The dog followed. Hamish sighed. It's going to be a long night. Chapter 6. The Ledger in the Dark. Hamish found Weatherby's car at the bottom of a muddy bank. Its front wheel resting against a stone wall. The bonnet was crumpled. One headlamp was broken, and rainwater ran down the windscreen in silver threads. Hamish stood above it with Towser beside him. Looks bad, said the dog. Hamish nodded. Aye. But not as bad as it looks. He climbed down carefully. The car had struck the wall at an angle too shallow to have caused serious damage. The driver's door was open. There was no blood on the seat, no broken glass inside, and no sign of Weatherby. Hamish examined the ground. 2 sets of footprints led away from the vehicle. One belonged to Weatherby. The other was smaller. Hamish crouched. The second set had a narrow heel and a peculiar inward turn. He had seen those footprints before, on the ridge. That's interesting. Towser sniffed the seat. Hamish looked inside. A folded map lay on the passenger seat. It showed the land around the hotel, including an old forestry track that no longer appeared on modern maps. Hamish picked it up. A red pencil mark circled a small building halfway up the mountain. There was a name written beside it. St. Combs Bothy. Hamish had never heard of it. That bothered him. He climbed back to the road. Blair was approaching with 2 constables. What have you found? A car. I can see that. Weatherby isn't in it. Blair stared down the bank. Could he have been thrown clear? No. How do you know? Because there isn't enough damage. Blair frowned. You're becoming very tiresome. I've been told. Hamish handed him the map. Blair studied it. What is this? An old track. And, I think Weatherby went there. Blair looked toward the mountain. In this weather? Why? Hamish shrugged. Perhaps he wanted a holiday. Blair gave him a cold stare. Phew! They searched the roadside for 20 minutes. There was no sign of Weatherby. Then one of the constables found something beneath a bush. A black leather glove. Hamish examined it. There was mud on the palm, and a tiny smear of blood. Weatherby's? Blair asked. Hamish turned it over. Maybe? His other glove is missing. Blair swore. Hamish looked toward the hotel. I'm going back. Why? To ask Mrs. Mackellar another question. Blair sighed. Of course you are. The hotel was strangely quiet when they returned. The guests had gathered in the lounge, whispering among themselves. Mrs. Mackellar stood behind the reception desk, pale and rigid. Hamish approached her. Where's your husband? She stared at him. My husband is dead. I know. You asked where he was. I meant his papers. Her face changed. What papers? The ones concerning the hotel. I don't know. Hamish smiled gently. Everyone keeps saying that tonight. He leaned closer. Who owns the land beneath room 8? Mrs. Mackellar said nothing. Blair stepped forward. Answer him. She looked at Blair, then Hamish. The Mackellar family. Not Kane? No. Not Weatherby? No. Then why are they interested? She lowered her voice. Because there is something underneath it. Hamish waited. What? A foundation. For what? A chapel. The room seemed colder. Mrs. Mackellar continued. Long before the hotel existed, there was a small chapel there. It was abandoned after the roof collapsed. During renovations, my husband found old records beneath the floor. What records? Names. Whose names? People who disappeared. Hamish stared at her. Blair looked irritated. This is nonsense. Mrs. Mackellar shook her head. No, it isn't. She reached beneath the desk and produced a small iron key. Hamish recognized it immediately. It matched the brass key found in Kane's hand. Where did you get that? My husband gave it to me before he died. Why? He said that if anyone ever came asking questions about room 8, I was to give it to the police. Hamish looked at Blair. Blair looked uncomfortable. Then the hotel's front door opened. A gust of cold air swept through the lobby. A man entered. His coat was torn. His face was bruised. It was Adrian Weatherby. Everyone stared. Weatherby closed the door behind him. He looked directly at Hamish. I know who killed Kane. Blair moved first. You're under arrest. Weatherby laughed. You don't understand. Hamish raised a hand. Let him speak. Weatherby looked exhausted. He didn't die because of the land. Then why? Because he found the ledger. Hamish frowned. What ledger? Weatherby reached inside his coat. Before he could remove anything, a shot cracked through the hotel. The window behind Weatherby exploded. He collapsed. People screamed. Hamish dropped to the floor. Towser barked furiously. Blair drew his weapon and shouted for everyone to stay down. Hamish crawled toward Weatherby. The Englishman was alive. Barely. His hand was clenched around a torn piece of paper. Hamish helped Weatherby sit against the wall. Who shot you? Weatherby breathed painfully. I never saw him. Her. He hesitated. No. Then you did see something. Weatherby looked toward the staircase. A shadow. Anyone you recognize? Not a face. What then? A smell. Hamish blinked. A smell. Smoke. Heather smoke. And whiskey. Hamish almost laughed. That describes half of Lockdow. Weatherby gripped his sleeve. Listen to me. Kane discovered the ledger 3 days ago. He wanted to sell it. Someone offered him money. He refused. Who? I don't know. Why were you following him? Because I was trying to protect him. Hamish raised an eyebrow. You did a poor job. I know. Weatherby coughed. The ledger contains names, payments, dates. Enough to ruin several people. Who? Weatherby whispered a name. Hamish stared at him. That can't be. Weatherby closed his eyes. It is. Then he lost consciousness. Hamish looked at Blair. For once, Blair had no answer. Hamish slipped the torn paper into his pocket and stood. Only 4 words were visible. The ledger is here. Hamish looked toward the staircase. Room 8 waited above them. And suddenly, he knew where he had to go. Chapter 7. The name in the ledger. Hamish climbed the stairs without hurrying. Behind him, the hotel lobby had become a chaos of frightened voices. One constable was tending to Weatherby, while another stood guard at the shattered window. Blair was shouting orders. Hamish ignored them. Towser followed close behind. At the end of the corridor, room 8 waited in darkness. Hamish unlocked it with the iron key Mrs. Mackellar had given him. The lock clicked. Inside, the room smelled of dust, damp stone, and something smoky. Hamish closed the door. He lit a lamp. The walls were bare. The floorboards looked ordinary. That was precisely why he distrusted them. He walked slowly across the room, tapping each board with his pocket knife. Tap, tap, tap. Towser sniffed beneath the wardrobe. Then the dog scratched at the floor. Hamish stopped. Well done. He knelt and examined the boards. One was slightly raised. He worked the blade beneath it. The board lifted. Beneath it was a narrow cavity. Inside lay a black leather ledger. Hamish stared at it. So that's what everyone has been killing for. He lifted it carefully. The leather was cracked with age. A brass clasp held the cover shut. He opened it. The first pages contained names, dates, and sums of money. Some names were unfamiliar. Others were not. Hotel owners, land agents, council officials, builders. Then Hamish saw the name Mackellar. Beside it was a payment dated 18 years earlier. He turned the page. Another name. Kane. Then Weatherby. But the final entry stopped him. Adrian Weatherby had not merely been receiving money. He had been paying it. Someone was coming. Hamish closed the ledger. He blew out the lamp and moved behind the door. The handle turned. A figure entered. Hamish waited. The person crossed toward the cavity. Hamish stepped forward. Looking for this? The figure spun around. It was Mrs. Mackellar. She gasped. Hamish raised the ledger. I thought you might come. I didn't know you had found it. You knew where it was. She lowered her eyes. My husband showed me the hiding place. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was afraid. Of whom? She looked toward the corridor. Everyone. Hamish studied her. You knew Kane was going to be killed. No. You knew he was in danger. Yes. There's a difference. She nodded miserably. Kane came here 3 days ago. He told me he had discovered what his father had done. The fraud. And more. What more? He discovered payments made to people in the village. Hamish looked at the ledger. Blackmail. Protection. From whom? She hesitated. The person who controls the land. Hamish smiled slightly. That's rather vague. You don't understand. Then explain. Mrs. McKellar whispered. There is a second ledger. Hamish stared at her. Where? I don't know. But Kane did. Yes. And Weatherby. He knew about it. That's why he came. She nodded. Hamish thought about the photograph. 3 people outside the hotel. Kane, Weatherby, Mrs. McKellar. You were working together. For a short time. To expose the person behind the payments? Yes. Then why did Weatherby say the killer wasn't interested in the land? Because the land is only the surface. Hamish looked at her. What is underneath? She swallowed. People. Hamish heard footsteps again. This time they were heavier. Mrs. McKellar whispered. We have to leave. Hamish shook his head. No. Why? Because whoever is coming wants the ledger. The door opened. Blair entered with a revolver in his hand. Mrs. McKellar stepped back. Hamish remained still. Blair looked at the ledger. Give it to me. Hamish smiled. You've become very interested in books. Macbeth. This is evidence. Of course. Blair extended his hand. Hamish did not move. What name did Weatherby whisper before he collapsed? Blair's expression changed. What? You heard him. I was busy. No, you weren't. Blair's face hardened. Give me the ledger. Hamish looked at him carefully. There was mud on Blair's boots, fresh mud, and a faint smell of peat smoke. Hamish remembered Weatherby's description. Smoke, heather, whiskey. Blair's coat smelled of whiskey. Hamish's stomach tightened. He had suspected many people, not Blair. Never Blair. Hamish stepped backward. You killed Kane. Blair raised the revolver. Mrs. McKellar gasped. Hamish. Blair's expression became strangely calm. You were always too clever. Hamish smiled. And you were always too impatient. Blair took another step. Give me the ledger. No. Then I'll take it. The door behind Blair slammed shut. Towser lunged. Blair stumbled. Hamish threw the ledger across the room. Blair turned instinctively. Mrs. McKellar seized the moment and kicked the revolver from his hand. It skidded beneath the bed. Hamish moved faster than Blair expected. He grabbed the inspector's wrist. Blair struck him hard across the face. Hamish staggered. Then Blair ran. Hamish followed. They burst into the corridor. Blair raced toward the stairs. Hamish shouted, "Stop!" Blair ignored him. He reached the landing. Towser intercepted him. The dog barked fiercely and snapped at his trousers. Blair fell against the banister. Hamish caught him. For several seconds they struggled. Then Blair slipped on the polished floor and crashed onto his back. His career was effectively over. Hamish looked down at him. You know, Blair. I was beginning to think you were merely incompetent. Blair glared. Hamish sighed. I preferred that. Downstairs, Weatherby had regained consciousness. When Hamish returned, the Englishman was sitting upright. Was it Blair? Weatherby asked. Hamish nodded. Weatherby closed his eyes. I knew he had taken the first ledger. The first? Weatherby looked at him. The second one is still missing. Hamish frowned. Where is it? Weatherby smiled weakly. In the place nobody has searched. Hamish looked toward Mrs. McKellar. She was staring at the hotel fireplace. Hamish followed her gaze. The old stone hearth. The place where everyone had been sitting. The place nobody had searched. Hamish sighed. His quiet life was becoming increasingly inconvenient. And somewhere behind the hotel wall, hidden in stone and darkness, another secret was waiting. Chapter 8. The secret behind the fire. The hotel fireplace had been built from rough Highland stone, blackened by decades of peat smoke and winter fires. Hamish stared at it. Weatherby sat in a chair near the window, one hand pressed against his injured shoulder. Mrs. McKellar stood beside the reception desk, watching Hamish as if she expected him to understand everything without asking. Towser was sniffing the hearth. Good dog, Hamish said. Blair was being guarded by the 2 constables downstairs. For once, nobody was giving Hamish orders. He found that surprisingly pleasant. He crouched beside the fireplace and examined the stones. Nothing. He tapped one. Solid. Another. Solid. The third made a hollow sound. Hamish smiled. There you are. Mrs. McKellar closed her eyes. Weatherby whispered. That's where he hid it. Hamish looked back. Who? My father. Your father hid the second ledger. Weatherby nodded. He knew someone would eventually come looking. Hamish worked the loose stone free. Behind it was a narrow cavity. Inside lay a second leather book. This one was smaller than the first. Its cover was stained almost black. Hamish lifted it carefully and placed it on the table. Nobody spoke. He opened the first page. There were no names, only dates. The dates stretched back 20 years. Then came a list of payments. Money had been given to officials, contractors, businessmen, and villagers. Some payments were described as loans. Others had no explanation. Near the bottom of the page appeared a familiar name, Douglas Kane. Beside it was a single word, witness. Hamish turned the page. There was another name, Adrian Weatherby. Beside his name was written, agent. Hamish looked at Weatherby. You weren't protecting Kane. Weatherby lowered his head. No. You were watching him. Yes. For whom? My employer. Your employer being Kane's family. Weatherby nodded. Hamish turned another page. Then he stopped. There was a third name, Margaret Mackellar. Beside it was written, keeper. Hamish looked at Mrs. Mackellar. What does keeper mean? She stared at the ledger. It means I was trusted to protect the evidence. By whom? Kane's father. Hamish shook his head. That makes no sense. It does if you know the whole story. Then tell me. Mrs. Mackellar sat down. 18 years ago, Douglas Kane's father wanted this hotel. He believed the village could become valuable if the road was built through the valley. He paid people to support the plan, and your husband opposed it. Yes. So he threatened him. He offered him money. Your husband refused. He refused twice. Hamish turned another page, a payment to a local councillor, another to a surveyor, another to a solicitor. Then he saw something unexpected, a payment to a police officer. Hamish's expression changed. The officer's initials were listed. DB. He looked toward Blair. The detective chief inspector had stopped struggling. He was staring at the ledger. Hamish closed the book. Who else knew about this? Mrs. Mackellar hesitated. Kane. Weatherby. Yes. And Blair. She nodded. Anyone else? The person who killed Kane. Hamish stood. Who is that? Mrs. Mackellar looked toward the rain-darkened windows. I don't know. Weatherby suddenly spoke. I do. Everyone turned. Weatherby pushed himself upright. Kane wasn't killed by Blair. Hamish frowned. Blair arranged things, but he didn't kill him. Then who did? Weatherby swallowed. The woman who brought him here. Hamish stared at him. What woman? She called herself Eleanor Grant. Mrs. Mackellar went pale. Hamish noticed. You know her. I know the name. Who is she? Mrs. Mackellar said nothing. Weatherby answered. She was Kane's father's secretary. Hamish looked at the ledger. Why would she kill Douglas? Because he discovered she had been stealing from the family for years. That seems ordinary enough. No. Weatherby shook his head. She wasn't stealing money. Hamish waited. She was stealing names. Hamish frowned. Names. People who had been paid. People who could expose the scheme. She removed their names from the records and replaced them with false ones. Why? To control them. The room became silent. Hamish understood. Blackmail. Not money. Power. The ledger wasn't merely a record of corruption. It was a map of secrets. Where is Eleanor now? Weatherby looked toward the stairs. She checked into the hotel yesterday. Hamish's eyes narrowed. Under what name? Mrs. Grant. Hamish turned to Mrs. Mackellar. How many guests are staying here? 7. Names? She began listing them. Mr. Weatherby. Mrs. Grant. Reverend McLean. Mr. and Mrs. Fraser. Miss Brodie. And a Mr. Thomas Bell. Hamish knew the name. Thomas Bell had been sitting quietly in the lounge all afternoon. He had said almost nothing. Hamish had noticed him, because he seemed determined not to be noticed. Where is Bell? In the dining room. Hamish moved toward the door. Then he stopped. Towser. The dog looked up. Stay with Mrs. Mackellar. Towser sat. Hamish walked into the dining room. 6 people were gathered around the long table. One seat was empty. Mrs. Grant's seat. Hamish looked toward the corridor. A door clicked shut. He ran. He reached the end of the hall, just as a figure disappeared through the rear entrance. Hamish burst outside. The rain had returned. Footprints crossed the muddy courtyard. Small, narrow, the left heel deeply worn. Hamish followed them toward the old forestry track. The footprints ended beside a stone wall. A woman's scarf lay on the ground. Hamish picked it up. There was blood on the fabric. Behind him, Towser began barking. Hamish turned. The dog stood beside a dark shape in the grass. Hamish approached slowly. It was Eleanor Grant. She was alive. Barely. Her eyes opened. She gripped Hamish's sleeve. Don't trust. Her voice faded. Who? She whispered one final word. McLean. Then she collapsed. Hamish looked toward the hotel. The Reverend McLean stood in the doorway. His face was perfectly calm. Too calm. Hamish sighed. Another suspect. And this one had been hiding in plain sight. Hamish disliked that person intensely, and for good reason. Chapter 9. The Reverend's Alibi. The Reverend McLean did not move when Hamish reached the hotel doorway. Rain dripped from the brim of Hamish's cap. Towser stood beside him, growling softly. Interesting, Hamish said. What is? You're very calm. I am a minister. That doesn't answer the question. McLean glanced toward Eleanor Grant. Is she alive? For the moment. Then we should get her inside. Hamish nodded. Aye. McLean stepped forward. Hamish blocked him. Stay there. The minister's smile disappeared. I was only trying to help. So was everyone else. Hamish knelt beside Eleanor. Her pulse was weak but steady. He removed his coat and placed it beneath her head. Towser, stay. The dog sat immediately. Hamish returned his attention to McLean. Where were you? In the dining room. Doing what? Talking to Mrs. Fraser. About. Nothing important. Hamish smiled. People always say that after murders. McLean frowned. You think I attacked her? I think she named you. She was injured. She may have been confused. She said your name clearly. Then perhaps she saw me. Perhaps. Hamish glanced at the minister's shoes. They were muddy. The left heel was deeply worn. Hamish felt a familiar certainty settle in his mind. You went outside. I took a walk earlier. When? Before dinner. How long? 20 minutes. Alone? Yes. Hamish nodded. Good. McLean looked relieved. Hamish walked past him. Because that means you can tell me why your footprints continue toward the forestry track. The minister stiffened. I cannot. Why? Because I never went there. Then whose boots are those? McLean looked down. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he laughed. You've made a mistake. Hamish had heard that before. Usually from guilty people. He helped Eleanor into the hotel with Towser's assistance. Mrs. Mackellar hurried from the lobby with blankets. Blair remained under guard, furious and humiliated. Macbeth, he called. What is happening? Hamish ignored him. He carried Eleanor into the lounge and laid her on a sofa. Mrs. Mackellar brought warm water. Weatherby watched from his chair. When he saw McLean, his expression changed. You. The minister looked at him. Do we know each other? Unfortunately. Hamish noticed. Where? Weatherby hesitated. London. McLean smiled faintly. I have never been to London. Liar. The room became silent. Hamish looked between them. What happened in London? Weatherby shook his head. Not here. Hamish sighed. Everyone says that. He turned toward McLean. Who are you really? I told you. Reverend. Yes. But before that. McLean's face hardened. I was a solicitor. Hamish looked at Weatherby. And you knew him. He worked for Kane's father. McLean said nothing. Weatherby continued. He prepared the original agreements. Hamish understood. The forged agreements. The payments. The land. The minister had been part of the scheme from the beginning. But why become a minister? McLean smiled bitterly. Guilt. Hamish shook his head. Guilt doesn't usually make people murder. No. Fear does. McLean looked away. Hamish walked to the fireplace. Eleanor discovered something. McLean remained silent. She found out that you had altered the ledger. Still silence. You removed your own name. McLean looked at him. I did not kill Douglas Kane. Who did? I don't know. Hamish studied him. You expect me to believe that? Yes. Why? Because Kane was alive when I left him. When? Yesterday evening. Hamish frowned. Where? At the old chapel. What were you doing there? Meeting him. About the ledger. Yes. What did he say? That someone was following him. Who? He didn't know. Did he mention Eleanor? McLean nodded. He said she had betrayed him. Hamish looked toward Eleanor. Her eyes remained closed. What else? He said the second ledger was hidden here. Did you know where? No. Hamish believed him. That surprised him. McLean was hiding something, but perhaps not murder. Then Hamish noticed a small smear on the minister's cuff. Dark red. Blood. What's that? McLean looked down. I don't know. Hamish reached for his wrist. McLean pulled away. The movement was quick. Too quick. Hamish's expression hardened. Now we're getting somewhere. McLean stepped backward. I can explain. Do. The blood isn't Eleanor's. Whose? McLean said nothing. Hamish waited. Finally the minister whispered. Kane's. Weatherby stood abruptly. You were there. Yes. And you lied. Yes. Why? Because Kane was already dead. The room seemed to stop breathing. Hamish stared at him. You found his body? No. McLean swallowed. I found him after someone had moved him. Moved him where? The chapel. Hamish's mind returned to the clean boots. Kane had not died on the ridge. His body had been carried there afterward. That explained everything. The strange footprints, the missing mud, the key, room 8, the chapel. Hamish turned toward Blair. "Get someone to the chapel." Blair laughed bitterly. "You're giving me orders now?" "Aye." Blair stared at him. Then he gestured to a constable. "Go." The officer left. Hamish looked at McLean. "Who moved Kane?" "I don't know." "Who killed him?" "I don't know." "You're becoming tiresome." McLean smiled weakly. "I learned from the best." Hamish looked toward Eleanor. Her eyes were open. She was watching him. "Constable," she whispered. Hamish approached. "Who killed Kane?" Eleanor's lips trembled. She looked at McLean, then Weatherby. Finally she looked directly at Hamish. "The person you haven't suspected." Hamish frowned. "Who?" Eleanor closed her eyes. A moment later she whispered, "Mrs. Mackellar." Hamish turned. Mrs. Mackellar stood behind him. Her face was empty. In her hand was the old iron key. Hamish slowly reached for his handcuffs, but before he could move, Mrs. Mackellar smiled, and Hamish realized he had finally found the person who had been waiting for him to discover the truth. She stepped backward toward the kitchen, still smiling. Towser growled, but Hamish raised a hand. He wanted answers before arrests. Outside, thunder rolled across the lock, and the hotel windows trembled. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard creaked, followed by another sound. A door quietly locking itself behind them, in darkness of the empty corridor. Chapter 10. The Last Door. Mrs. Mackellar stood beside the kitchen door, the iron key clenched between her fingers. Hamish watched her carefully. "Mrs. Mackellar," he said, "put the key down." She smiled. "You always were a polite policeman. I'm trying something new." Behind him, Weatherby groaned. Eleanor remained on the sofa. McLean stood motionless. Blair watched from his chair, guarded by the constables. Mrs. watched. Mackellar glanced at them all. "None of you understand." "Then explain." She shook her head. "You've spent 2 days looking at the wrong things." Hamish sighed. "That seems to be contagious. You think Douglas Kane was killed because of money?" "I did." "You think Adrian came here because of the land?" "I did." "You think the ledger is the secret?" Hamish looked at the black book lying on the table. "Isn't it?" "No." She raised the key. "The ledger is only proof." "Proof of what?" "Of what happened 18 years ago." Hamish studied her face. "Your husband." She nodded. "He didn't die naturally." The room fell silent. "His death was arranged," she said. "He knew too much. He had discovered that the original land agreement was fraudulent. Kane's father wanted him frightened into silence." "Did Kane's father kill him?" "No." "Then who?" Mrs. Mackellar looked at Blair. "Ask him." Everyone turned. Blair's face went white. Hamish stared at him. "You knew." Blair said nothing. "Blair." The inspector looked down. "I was a constable then. And I was ordered to make the death look accidental." "By whom?" Blair looked toward Mrs. Mackellar. "Her husband." Hamish frowned. "That makes no sense. He wanted to protect the hotel." Mrs. Mackellar's expression hardened. "He was protecting me." Hamish understood. Her husband had arranged the cover-up because he believed the only way to save the hotel was to make a bargain with the people threatening it. But something had gone wrong. "What happened afterward?" Mrs. Mackellar spoke quietly. "My husband carried the guilt for years. Kane discovered the truth. He threatened to expose everyone. Everyone. Everyone whose name appeared in the ledger." Hamish looked at Blair. "And you?" Blair nodded. "Kane demanded money. Did you pay him?" "No." "Why?" "Because someone else killed him first." Hamish turned to Mrs. Mackellar. "You?" She looked toward Eleanor. "She killed him." Eleanor opened her eyes. "No." Hamish stared at her. Mrs. Mackellar continued. "Eleanor came here to steal the second ledger. Douglas caught her. They fought. He fell." Hamish shook his head. "That doesn't explain the wound." "No." Mrs. Mackellar looked down. "I struck him." Silence. "With what?" "A fireplace poker." Weatherby closed his eyes. "You killed him?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because he was going to expose my husband." Hamish walked slowly toward her. "Then why move the body?" "To make it look as though he died on the ridge." "Why the key?" "I wanted you to find room 8. "Why?" "Because I knew you would discover the ledger." Hamish frowned. "You wanted me to solve it?" "Yes." "Why?" Mrs. Mackellar smiled sadly. "Because I knew Blair would destroy the evidence." Blair shouted. "That's a lie." Hamish turned. "Is it?" Blair said nothing. Hamish looked back at Mrs. Mackellar. "You could have confessed." "I couldn't." "Why not?" "Because I had one thing left to protect." Hamish waited. "My daughter." He had never heard of Mrs. Mackellar having a daughter. "Where is she?" In Glasgow. Is she involved? No. Then why protect her? Because Kane's father threatened her before he died. He said the family would destroy anyone who exposed them. Hamish nodded slowly. The motive was ugly, but human. Then Eleanor suddenly sat upright. Margaret, she whispered. Mrs. Mackellar looked at her. You didn't kill Douglas. Hamish froze. What? Eleanor continued. I saw you strike him. But he was already dying. Mrs. Mackellar stared. What are you saying? The wound from your poker wasn't fatal. Hamish looked toward McLean. Then who killed Kane? McLean's face changed. Eleanor pointed at him. He did. McLean stepped backward. No. Weatherby rose. You killed him. McLean shook his head. He was going to expose me. Hamish felt the pieces fall into place. McLean had altered the records and killed Kane to prevent the second ledger from being discovered. Mrs. Mackellar had struck Kane afterward, believing she had killed him. Then she had helped move the body. Everyone had been protecting a different secret. McLean suddenly ran. Hamish chased him through the kitchen. The minister shoved open the rear door and disappeared into the rain. Hamish followed. Towser raced ahead. McLean reached the old path. He slipped. Hamish caught him by the coat. The two men crashed against the stone wall. McLean struggled. You don't understand. Hamish tightened his grip. McLean punched him. Hamish staggered. Then he remembered the one thing he hated more than murder: running. He tackled McLean into the wet grass. Towser arrived barking furiously. Hamish pulled out his handcuffs. Reverend McLean, you're under arrest. McLean stopped fighting. Rain ran down his face. You'll never prove it. Hamish smiled. That's the beauty of village gossip. He hauled him up. Someone always knows something. Back at the hotel, Blair surrendered his weapon. Weatherby gave a full statement. Mrs. Mackellar confessed to moving Kane's body, but the evidence supported her claim that McLean had inflicted the fatal injury. The second ledger contained enough evidence to expose the entire scheme. Hamish handed both books to the investigating officers. Then he quietly removed his name from the reports wherever possible. Blair would receive most of the credit. Hamish considered it an excellent arrangement. A solved murder meant attention. Attention meant promotion. Promotion meant Strathbane. And Strathbane meant paperwork. The next morning, Lochdu was peaceful again. Hamish sat beside his stove with a fresh pot of coffee. Towser slept nearby. Rain tapped softly against the window. Hamish lifted his mug. To quiet days. Towser opened one eye. Hamish smiled. Don't worry. He took a sip. No one knows how clever we are. Outside, the mountains disappeared into mist. Inside, Hamish settled deeper into his chair. For the moment, Lochdu was safe again. And, more importantly, nobody had offered him a promotion. Chapter 11. A quiet cup of coffee. For 3 mornings after the arrest, Lochdu behaved as though nothing unusual had happened. Hamish considered this the finest possible outcome. There were no reporters crowding the village. No important men from Inverness had arrived to shake his hand. No politician had appeared to congratulate him. Most importantly, no one from Strathbane had telephoned to discuss his future. He sat beside the stove with a mug of coffee and watched rain crawl down the window. Towser slept at his feet. You see, Hamish said. Everything is back to normal. Towser snored. Hamish took another sip. The telephone rang. He froze. Towser opened one eye. The telephone rang again. Hamish looked at it with deep suspicion. It could be Blair. The dog closed his eye. It could be headquarters. Towser rolled onto his back. Hamish waited. The telephone rang a third time, with the air of a condemned man approaching the gallows. Hamish picked up the receiver. Police station. Macbeth? It was Sergeant McRae. Hamish sighed. Aye. Just calling about the hotel case. Hamish's stomach tightened. What about it? You did a good job. Hamish glanced toward Towser. The dog looked away. Thank you. There may be a commendation. Hamish nearly dropped the receiver. A what? A commendation. I don't need one. You don't get to decide that. Hamish rubbed his forehead. Who is getting the credit? There was a pause. DCI Blair. Hamish relaxed. Excellent. Macbeth? Aye? Blair says you were indispensable. Hamish's expression collapsed. That doesn't sound like Blair. He also says you showed unusual initiative. That's worse. And there is talk of transferring you to Strathbane. Hamish stood up. No. McRae laughed. I'm joking. Hamish sat down again. That isn't funny. It was to me. The line went dead. Hamish stared at the receiver. Then he smiled. For once, bureaucracy had worked in his favor. The village soon supplied its own version of the hotel murder. According to Mrs. Campbell at the post office, Weatherby had been a secret agent. According to the butcher, Blair had solved everything himself. According to the minister's elderly aunt, McLean had been innocent, and had been framed by London bankers. Hamish heard all 3 stories before lunch. He corrected none of them. There were advantages to letting people believe whatever they liked. At the Whodunit Hotel, repairs had already begun. The shattered window had been boarded up. The corridor had been scrubbed. Room 8 remained locked. Hamish visited Mrs. Mackellar one afternoon. She was sitting behind the reception desk. "You're looking well," Hamish said. "I've slept. That helps." She gave him a tired smile. "Thank you." "For what?" "For believing me. I didn't completely. I know." Hamish leaned against the desk. "What will happen to the hotel?" "I'll keep it." "Good. Why?" "Because I like the coffee." She laughed. "That's the only reason?" "And the scones." "Of course." He turned to leave. "Constable." Hamish looked back. "Do you think my husband was a bad man?" Hamish considered the question. "No. Even after everything? He made terrible choices. So did I." "Aye." She smiled sadly. "But you're still here." Hamish nodded. "That's usually the important part." Outside, the rain had stopped. The loch was dark beneath a pale sky. Hamish walked down toward the water with Towser. A fishing boat moved slowly across the bay. For several minutes, neither man nor dog spoke. Then Towser stopped. Hamish looked down. "What is it?" The dog was staring toward the hotel. A figure stood in an upstairs window. Hamish narrowed his eyes. It was Adrian Weatherby. He was supposed to be recovering under police supervision in Inverness. Hamish blinked. The window was empty. "Towser." The dog looked at him. "You saw that?" Towser wagged his tail. Hamish walked back toward the hotel. Weatherby was not there. Mrs. Mackellar looked surprised when Hamish asked about him. "He left yesterday." "Where did he go?" "Inverness." "Did he say why?" "No." Hamish scratched his chin. Something bothered him. He returned to room 8. The door was locked. He checked the lock. Untouched. Then he noticed something on the floor. A small brass key. Hamish picked it up. It was not the key from Kane's hand. It was newer. There was a number engraved on it. 9. Hamish looked toward room 9. The room belonged to a quiet guest named Thomas Bell. Hamish had barely spoken to him during the investigation. That suddenly seemed important. He walked downstairs. Bell was sitting alone in the lounge, reading a newspaper. Hamish approached. "Mr. Bell?" The man lowered the paper. "Yes? Where are you from?" "Edinburgh." "Business?" "Insurance." Hamish nodded. "Interesting. Why?" "Because Weatherby mentioned an insurance company." Bell folded the newspaper. "I don't know Mr. Weatherby." "Of course." Hamish smiled. Bell did not. For several seconds, the 2 men stared at each other. Then Bell stood. "I have a train to catch." "There aren't any trains from Whodunit." Bell's face went blank. Hamish smiled. "That's what I thought." Bell suddenly moved toward the door. Towser blocked him. Bell stopped. Hamish sighed. "Sit down." The man sat. Hamish looked at the brass key. "Tell me about room 9. Bell's eyes dropped to it. That was enough. Hamish smiled. The hotel mystery had ended, but another little secret had just begun. And Hamish, despite himself, felt a flicker of interest. Then he remembered the paperwork waiting at the station. The interest vanished. "Tomorrow," he said. Bell frowned. "Tomorrow?" "Aye." Hamish turned toward the door. "Today I'm having coffee." Towser followed. Outside, the highlands were quiet beneath the evening mist. Hamish walked home slowly. For now, the murder was solved. For now, Whodunit was peaceful. And for now, Hamish Macbeth had something far more important to investigate: whether there were any fresh scones left at the hotel. He decided that, whatever happened tomorrow, tonight belonged to coffee, scones, Towser, and the comforting sound of rain against his windows while Whodunit settled into another peaceful Highland evening again. Chapter 12. The Secret That Remained. Hamish returned to the Whodunit Hotel the following morning with the reluctant expression of a man reporting for jury duty. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained low and grey over the mountains. Towser trotted beside him, occasionally stopping to sniff the wet grass. "I know what you're thinking," Hamish said. Towser looked up. "You're thinking there may be breakfast." The dog wagged his tail. "Exactly." Inside, Mrs. Mackellar was serving coffee. Thomas Bell sat alone near the window, reading yesterday's newspaper. Hamish took a seat opposite him. "Morning." Bell folded the paper. "Constable. Sleep well?" "Perfectly. Good." Hamish accepted a cup of coffee from Mrs. Mackellar. Bell watched him. "You wanted to speak to me." "Aye. About the key." Hamish placed the brass key on the table. Bell looked at it for barely a second. Then he smiled. "It isn't mine. I didn't say it was. You implied it. I merely put it on the table." Bell leaned back. You've solved the murder. Why are you still interested? Hamish sipped his coffee. Because I've discovered that solving one mystery doesn't stop people from having another. Bell laughed. That sounds philosophical. It isn't. I'm hungry. Mrs. Mackellar brought a plate of scones. Hamish thanked her. Bell watched him take one. Very well, he said. I'll tell you. Hamish stopped chewing. Bell lowered his voice. I work for an insurance company in Edinburgh. You said that. My company insured several properties connected with Kane's family. Hamish waited. After Douglas Kane died, we discovered something unusual. What? Large policies had been taken out on several people. Hamish frowned. Life insurance? Yes. Who were the beneficiaries? Bell hesitated. People connected with the old land scheme. Hamish looked toward Mrs. Mackellar. She had stopped polishing a glass. Go on, Bell continued. Douglas Kane had recently changed his policy. To whom? To a person called Eleanor Grant. Hamish nearly dropped his scone. But Eleanor worked for Kane's family. She did. Why insure Kane for her benefit? She didn't arrange it. Then who did? Bell shook his head. We don't know. Hamish thought about the second ledger. Could the policy have been forged? Yes. Was it? Bell smiled faintly. That is what I was investigating. Hamish leaned forward. Then why come here? Because Kane left instructions that if anything happened to him, I was to find the person named in a sealed letter. Who was named? Bell looked directly at him. Adrian Weatherby. Hamish sighed. Of course. Bell continued. Weatherby was not merely Kane's agent. He had been investigating the family himself. Why? Because he discovered payments made to an insurance broker. McLean. No. Blair. No. Then who? Bell glanced toward the doorway. Hamish followed his gaze. A woman stood there. She wore a dark green coat and carried a small suitcase. Hamish recognized her immediately. Eleanor Grant. She was alive, pale, and awake. You're supposed to be resting, Hamish said. I dislike hospitals. So do I. She entered the room. Bell stood. You came. I said I would. Hamish looked from one to the other. You know each other? Yes, Eleanor said. How? We worked together. Bell nodded. Hamish sighed. Everyone in this hotel seems to have worked together. Eleanor sat down. There is one thing you still don't know. Hamish reached for another scone. There's always one thing. The first ledger was incomplete. I suspected that. The second ledger was incomplete too. Hamish stopped eating. What is missing? 3 pages. Where? Eleanor looked toward the fireplace. Burned. By whom? Me. Hamish stared at her. Why? Because they contained the names of people who had nothing to do with the crime. That was kind. It was necessary. Bell leaned forward. But there was another page. What page? The final page. Hamish frowned. Where is it? Eleanor looked at Mrs. Mackellar. Mrs. Mackellar slowly approached the table. She held a small envelope. Hamish recognized the handwriting. Douglas Kane. He opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. There were 6 names. The first 5 meant little to him. The 6th made him sit very still. Hamish read it again. Then he looked at Mrs. Mackellar. Are you sure? Yes. What does it mean? She shook her head. I don't know. Hamish folded the paper. For the first time, he felt genuinely uneasy. The final name belonged to someone in Whodunit. Someone he trusted. Someone who had been beside him throughout the investigation. Someone who had quietly provided tea, food, information, and shelter. Hamish looked toward the kitchen. His stomach tightened. The mystery had not ended with McLean's arrest. It had only changed shape. He stood. I need to go. Mrs. Mackellar frowned. Where? To the police station. Why? Hamish picked up the envelope. Because there is something I forgot to check. Outside, the wind had returned. Towser followed him down the road. Hamish walked quickly. He did not speak for several minutes. Then he stopped beside the lock. The water was dark and restless. Towser. The dog looked up. I think someone helped us. Towser wagged his tail. And I think that someone has been lying. The dog tilted his head. Hamish sighed. That means paperwork. Towser looked horrified. I know. Hamish smiled, despite himself. He turned toward the village. Whodunit was quiet behind him, its chimneys sending thin threads of smoke into the cold air. The mountains stood dark against the sky. For everyone else, the case was finished. For Hamish Macbeth, it was not. Not quite. He had learned something important in the Remote Highland Hotel. Murder was rarely about the first secret people discovered. It was about the secret they were desperate to keep buried after everyone else had gone home. Hamish tucked the letter inside his coat. He would solve this one too, but not today. Today, he decided, he would have coffee. And perhaps, if Mrs. McKellar was feeling generous, another scone. Towser trotted beside him. The village bells rang noon. Hamish smiled. Loch Dhu was safe. Midi Ausham. For now.